Shall we get started?
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone again. Like Allison said, thank you for being here on a Saturday afternoon. My name is Amara Anoniwu. I'm the Housing and Homelessness Outreach Coordinator for Lake Avenue Church. And I'm happy to say we are committed to being part of this coalition, and I will be moderating for you today. This is the first of a series of conversations as we seek to get community input for updating Pasadena's housing element due in October of this year. Next slide. I load that picture. And so we just want to give a thanks to all of the organizations that that are co-sponsors for this event. Thank you so much for coming alongside us. Next slide, Mark. Thank you. So, as you can see here, our goal is simple. Everyone in our city deserves access to safe and affordable housing. And the housing element is the opportunity to work together as a community to accomplish that goal. So this afternoon, you'll be hearing from members of the Abundant Housing LA, Making Housing and Community Happen, Pasadena's Organizing for Progress, or POP. And these three organizations make up the Pasadena Affordable Housing Coalition. We want this initial meeting to give you a great context for the history of housing and the impact that the housing element has, so that you are further equipped to get involved and to spread the word. But before we begin, we'd like to take a quick poll to see what you already think about affordability of housing in Pasadena. And we will review the results at the end of the presentation. So just a few moments, let's see you guys and your answers. See it populating, good job. Our first question is the Pasadena area median income for a family of 4 is approximately $75,000. The average price of a home in Pasadena is about $1 million. The average monthly rent is approximately $2,500. Can a working family of 4 afford to live in Pasadena? It's yes or no. Excited to see what you guys think. I have just a little less than a minute to get in on that poll. Looks like we're about 70, now 80% there. So make sure you get your answer in. Before we're moving on to the next question in just a moment. Okay, and you should see our next poll question up on your screen. Do you think Pasadena should make it a priority to build more affordable housing? Well, you guys are quick on this one. We're about 85% of you have answered already. So make sure you get your poll answers in. And we'll get those results and go over those at the end of the presentation. Wonderful, 90%. Great, okay. And so now I'm excited for us to dive in, and I'm going to turn it over to Allison Henry of Everyone In and San Gabriel Valley Tenants Alliance.
Thank you, Amara. I'm realizing everything's limitations on the multitasking here. So let me get to the next slide as well. Thanks everyone again for joining us here on this Saturday afternoon. Oh, my apologies. We had our list of speakers and our poll results. All right. All right, so there I am. So thanks everyone. Many of you also know me as organizing with tenants here in Pasadena. I've branched out because a lot of cities don't have a lot of the infrastructure that Pasadena has for tenants. So I would invite you all to check out and like San Gabriel Valley Tenants Alliance on Facebook. And if you have tenants in need or tenants that want to organize in other areas in the San Gabriel Valley, please send them my way. And I was very fortunate to be an organizer with everyone in the United Way's field organizing program. Just an interesting FYI, they're winding down their field organizing programs, so you'll see me causing trouble in other places. But everyone in has really been trying to get people to participate in ending homelessness. And some of that includes actually participating in what we're doing today, right? The housing element discussion. So we all know we have a housing crisis. We've got a housing crisis in California. We have a housing crisis in LA County. We have a housing crisis in Pasadena. And it looks similar and different in all the communities I've mentioned. So what do I mean by housing crisis, right? So the next two slides are going to have some specific information. We're sharing this information for you on the call here, but as everyone knows, this is going to be recorded and shared out because these are some significant pieces of information that are mission critical to know and understand when talking about the housing crisis. So first off, we know as a state, we're actually experiencing more homelessness than any other state in the nation. We know that this housing crisis hits seniors, Latinos and Latinas, African Americans, low-wage workers, and families with children harder. Though it hits everyone very hard, but these are real call-outs for folks that are impacted by the housing crisis. And the number below here that we have to build 3.5 million new homes in 4 years. In 4 years to accommodate the current demand, what we have now, not anticipating people coming into the state or additional folks being born, right? We know that the average rent in California is extremely high. Pasadena's average rent is about $2,500. We are seeing that coming down a little bit with COVID, not much, and it really only affects new tenants rather than people in their existing buildings. I have not actually heard of any tenant getting their rent lowered. We know that 54% of Californians are overburdened by housing costs. So I'll say that again, 54% of California renters, so the majority, are overburdened by housing costs. What does that mean? It means they spend more than 30% of their income on housing. And we know that 77% of extremely low income households in California spend more than half of their income on rent. And this is getting worse as we are hit by pandemic. We also know that rents have skyrocketed. So while incomes have dipped, if you feel like you haven't been getting ahead wage-wise in your job, here's the ugly truth. If you feel that your rent's been going up faster than your wage, here it is. So a minus 3% in median renter income on the left, and on the right, a plus 32% in median rent. I would also note that while this is impossible for working people and wages to sustain, this also hits our seniors really hard. While we're not seeing the same rent increases we were before the Tenant Protection Act of 2019, we are seeing rent increases that are outpacing seniors' incomes and what they're able to sustain. So when we think about who this is hitting hard, it's a pretty wide band of folks. We also know that our county homeless population is on the rise. We know that. I would lift up here at this point that because of pandemic and other, I'm sure, limitations, we're not doing a homeless count this year, y'all. So we know that 2020, January 2020, before COVID, we know there was a growth in homelessness, and it's all over the county, right? It's not only Skid Row anymore. It's moved out to places and bedroom communities in the entirety of the county, and this is a crisis. But without a count for 2021, we won't have as good a data. So I would just get that on everyone else's radar as well. Finally, a recent economic roundtable study looked at the housing crisis and then 2 years from now. And we're going to have an additional 52,000 people in LA County homeless. And I think that's a low figure. We know that we've got over 60,000 people unsheltered, right, in the county. So, knowing what's going on with the pandemic, all this stuff, this is a low figure. So this is a stark place where we're at. But it's good to know, right? In any plan, in any movement forward, you must have an honest State of the Union to make the best plans and use the best ideas going forward. So with that, I think I'll be passing it over to my esteemed fellow organizer and activist, Jill Shook, to take her next part of the presentation. Thank you.
Can't hear you, Jill.
So Allison, thank you. I always love hearing you present. I learn something new every time, so thank you for that. I am getting myself connected here. I apologize. There we go. So what I want to start with is just mentioning to you that this is actually the third housing element that I've combed through in detail with others equally as passionate. In fact, some people on the call today. I'm seminary trained and I have mostly done mission work, but truly I feel called and I see that this kind of deep dive into city planning is deeply spiritual work. People like me have a lot to repent of. The legacy of segregation is real. Books like The Color of Law help us to see this. About 65% of our city had racial covenants. So essentially homes could never be bought or sold by people of color until Martin Luther King helped us pass the Fair Housing Act in 1968. But there's still a legacy of many things that need to be undone. While property values were soaring without fear of any Blacks nearby, the northwest part of our city where Blacks could purchase had to start their own bank to have access to loans. All the while other factors displaced whole Black and Latino neighborhoods due to urban renewal, which in effect was Negro removal. For example, where Parsons now is, was home to about 20,000 residents whose homes were all bulldozed. Friendship Baptist is a remnant of what was once part of a thriving Black and Latino community in that area. After urban renewal came the 1956 Highway Act, which provided funding to displace more folks to make way for the 210 freeway. The average price of the home at that time was around $85,000, but folks were paid about $75,000, not enough to stay in Pasadena. As a result, our city has lost over half of our Black population, and too many people of color are ending up in our streets. Blacks are the majority of those who are experiencing homelessness as a consequence of long shadows of unjust housing policy and land use policies. With the affirmatively furthering fair housing, which is now part of the housing element, we have the opportunity to further address this. Next slide, please. A growing number of our city has become renters. In fact, 58%. Homes are just too expensive for the average cost, with the average cost of homes at $1 million each. There was 527 folks experiencing homelessness in Pasadena's 2020 count. So keep in mind that these are not just numbers. They're people with feelings and needs just like ours. Some may even have been our neighbors. There was a question added to this last homeless count regarding people's origin, and about half of our homeless neighbors indicated that they were from Pasadena. In fact, some have lived here for over 30 years. About 700 students in our city are also considered homeless. This figure is calculated. It's a different methodology than the city's counting those that are doubled up. So it's not uncommon to see 4 and 5 families in one apartment in order to make ends meet. There's one home that I could take you to today that has 10 families living in it. This is not healthy, especially for our youth. I helped start an after-school program called STARS at Lake Avenue Church, and many of the youth involved were living in apartments that were being flipped out from under them, with landlords selling them. So we learned about the Agape Court affordable housing complex, and this safe environment, after moving kids in there, with parents only spending a third of their income on housing, caused them to thrive. And today, all of them have graduated from college and completely break that cycle of poverty. Seeing the transformational power of affordable housing woke me to become involved in affordable housing. When the figure of 23,000 on our Section 8 waiting list for the city of Pasadena was presented to the city council, Jean Masuda, who represents East Pasadena, said there must be too many zeros in that number. But our housing director, Bill Wong, made it clear that it was accurate. With such a high number, we should not lose heart, but do all we can to address the crisis. The housing element allows us to do that, to plan a city that works for everybody. Next slide, please. We need to consider how to look at some very targeted development along transportation corridors, and to get creative with ideas like allowing housing in empty office buildings, or over one-story stores like CVS, or ADUs over garages, and even filling in that ditch where the 210 and the 710, the stub, they call it. We could do all kinds of affordable housing that could undo years of displacement and disparity, and at the same time create a beautiful, completely sustainable community. I can tell you from my prior experiences of working with the housing element that it takes imagination, bold courage, and patience, anything worthwhile, like making sure our children can live in our city and that all of us have a place to call home, is so worth it. Next slide, please. The RHNA, which stands for the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, excuse me, allocates the number of units that the city needs to plan for, including very low, and moderate income, including and even market rate units. Most workers in Pasadena are in the very low or low income categories. In the past, allocations for these lower income bands were too few, only a token of the real need. With 9,000 units now to be planned for, with 2/3 of this number to be affordable, it comes much closer to the real need. Some say it's impossible. I say we don't know until we try, and I believe it is possible. And my faith helps me to imagine it. If we want a city that allows all of us to have a chance to thrive, then together I believe we can figure this out. Thank you for allowing me to present today.
All right, thank you, Jill. My name is Margaret Munoz. I'm a community organizer with Abundant Housing LA. So Jill introduced you all to the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, which sets the allocation of housing units for the housing element update. Now we're going to explore these in detail. Next slide, please. Thank you. But first, we must discuss the million-dollar question. So how do we solve the housing crisis? As Allison stated earlier, this crisis is unprecedented in LA County. Solving this crisis is going to take courage, hard work, and patience. First, we need to focus on taking responsibility for Pasadena's share of meeting the regional housing need for all income, formerly known as the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or RHNA for short. Every city and county in California is required to have a general plan that is regularly updated. As part of that general plan, each city must have a housing element, which plans the future of housing for the next 8 years. The housing element must be updated to plan for meeting the assigned RHNA target over that 8-year period. Pasadena's assigned RHNA target for the next housing element cycle is 9,409 new units. In addition to planning for these units, there is also the opportunity to include broad policies in the housing element. Some policies that could be included are those targeting tenant protection, homelessness reduction, displacement prevention, and pathways to homeownership. Next slide, please. All right, so how are these cities assigned RHNA allocations or targets? First of all, it's important to understand that the RHNA allocation occurs because the state requires every city to plan for housing growth. As for the process by which cities are assigned RHNA allocations or targets, first, the state sets RHNA targets for each region, and then each region must allocate their total number of RHNA units among their local jurisdictions. LA County falls within the Southern California Association of Governments region, or SCAG for short. SCAG covers Los Angeles, Orange, Riverside, San Bernardino, Ventura, and Imperial counties. SCAG based their 2021-2029 RHNA allocation on 4 main factors, including household growth, job accessibility, transit accessibility, and social equity. Next slide, please. So based on these 4 main factors, Pasadena's RHNA allocation is 9,409 new units. As you can see, 5,960 of which are affordable units, ranging from very low to moderate income. This means that about 63% of the RHNA allocation are affordable units. So this total new unit allocation is a more than 250% increase from the 2014 to 2021 housing element update cycle, which only allocated 2,589 total new units to Pasadena. Next slide, please. Great. So the RHNA process has concluded as of earlier this month. The state set the unit target for the SCAG region for a total of 1.3 million new units, of which LA County received more than 800,000. It should be noted that the 1.3 million new units accounts for the housing not built by the SCAG region during previous housing element cycles. SCAG approved their formula for RHNA based on the 4 main factors and finalized the RHNA allocations for each jurisdiction. In September 2020, the Pasadena City Council voted to appeal its RHNA allocation, and this month the appeal was denied. Pasadena's RHNA allocation is now final. Next slide, please. Great. So while the RHNA process has concluded, the housing element update process is now upon us. The housing element update is our opportunity to ensure that everyone in Pasadena has access to housing they can afford. The city must submit their housing element update for review to the state by October of this year, and their housing element must be approved by the state in February of 2022. Next, I'll pass it on to Rick Cole.
Thank you, Margaret. We're going to talk about the housing element, which is really the heart of why we organized this meeting here this afternoon. Let's go to the next slide. So as you've heard, housing elements are required by state law and they must be updated every 8 years. In the past, housing elements didn't get a lot of attention. A couple reasons for that. One, they were largely technical, and 2, there wasn't much teeth to force cities to abide by them. But that's changed dramatically, and primarily because of changes in state law. 2 of the most important are increasing focus on reducing greenhouse gases, which means cutting down those long commutes. Instead of building housing on the far fringes and expecting people to commute back to their jobs, SCAG is saying we need to put the housing where the jobs are. That will reduce greenhouse gases and cut down on the impact of these long commutes on families and the time that people have in their homes. But there's also new requirements that the housing element not just take place with the people that pay attention to these things, activists, realtors, developers, planning commissioners, but in fact, the whole community. And in fact, cities are now required to make a diligent effort to reach out to renters, to low-income seniors, to Spanish speakers, to young people. That's a big order, and the state requires it. Next slide. So at the heart of a housing element, is showing not only that theoretically you could build 9,400 units, 2/3 of which are affordable, but can you actually do it? Can you point to suitable sites that are either currently vacant, like the 710 stub that Jill mentioned, or that are underutilized, and that maybe a one-story photomat in the middle of a parking lot that could be turned into high-quality housing. But you have to make sure that that you actually can demonstrate to the state of California for their approval that realistically you can meet those numbers in the next 8 years. That's a tall order. Next slide. And I've mentioned that the state has gotten tougher. And one of the ways in which they've gotten tougher is they've said, if you tell us that a site could accommodate 34 units, and then when the project is finally approved, it only has 24 units, well, then you're 10 short, and you've got to make up for that somewhere else. So they're going to be much more rigorous in their analysis. Another thing is if you say, well, we'll build 1,000 accessory dwelling units in people's backyards, people will go to that. But if you've only been producing 25 a year, the state's going to say, well, how are you going to get from 25 a year to building 1,000 in 8 years? You're going to have to demonstrate that you have the program, the funding, and the policies that will make that really happen. So next slide. Now, what happens if October rolls around and Pasadena submits a housing element and the state says, you've fallen short. You made a good effort, but here are the 7 things that need to change in order for you to get state approval. Well, if by the next February, Pasadena doesn't have a state-approved housing element, it's immediately subject to lawsuits by anyone on this call, by organizations, by developers, by the state itself. Governor Newsom, the first thing he did when he became governor was sue the city of Huntington Beach for having a deficient housing element. There are also state fines up to $100,000 a month. The state can cut off key funding. And probably the most draconian from the standpoint of those of us who live here in Pasadena is it's a complete end to local control. Because if we don't have a compliant housing element as of a year from now, a developer can come in, and as long as they have 20% of their project has affordable housing, they can build anywhere in the city, regardless of the zoning laws. That's a dramatic change in state law, and it really means that we should all be paying attention to the update of the housing element. Next slide. So where do we go from here? Next slide. A number of other cities actually have a jump on Pasadena. South Pasadena, our neighbor, is on their 4th workshop with the public. We have not yet announced workshops. There have been some discussions at the Planning Commission, and a consultant has been hired. Believe it or not, there are some cities that are actually behind Pasadena. And so even though we have some catching up to do, there are other cities. And again, every city in Southern California has to do the same thing. Let's go on to the next slide. And I briefly mentioned this earlier, but I want to emphasize this for the purpose of our call. We have 100 people who are participating in today's webinar, but there's 140,000 people that live in Pasadena. And really everyone has a stake in this housing element. Even if you're securely housed, you're concerned about homelessness. If you're not securely housed, which tens of thousands of Pasadenans are, the future really comes down to whether we include the whole community in these hard discussions so that we can come up not just with a plan that satisfies some state officials in Sacramento, but a plan that will work for Pasadena over the next 8 years. Next slide. And working in Pasadena is not easy. We're a diverse, complicated community, as Jill talked about the dark legacy of racial segregation, that still those scars have not yet healed, and the inequities continue to the present day. The city's gearing up for community outreach, and we have Bill Wong from our housing department to talk about all of the things that the city has been doing on this issue. But the reality is that without new policies, new programs, and new funding, we cannot achieve 6,400 or 6,000 units of affordable housing. We just don't produce. We didn't make the numbers last time when the numbers were lower. And unless we really commit, and something like 98% of you said we need to build more affordable housing, we have to figure out how to do that. And it's a reality that people are concerned about traffic. They're concerned about change in their neighborhood. They're concerned about gentrification and displacement. We're going to have to deal with those. Those are real problems. Those are real concerns. And so as we plan to build affordable housing, we need to plan carefully and bring all the community voices and find sensible, workable solutions that people can get behind so we can actually achieve success. And here's a reality. People who like things the way they are well organized. People who are working 2 jobs, people who are barely making the rent, people who are living homeless on the street, they may have a big stake in change, but they're not well organized. We have to reach out to them, and in many cases, we have to advocate on their behalf. Last slide. Now, here's the opportunity. If we work together as a whole community to find out where this housing can happen, how it can be fair and equitable, how it can meet the needs of people who live in our community and people who work in our community, that's a huge step forward. It will remove us from jeopardy from all of the teeth in the state's draconian new sticks that they want to use to force cities to comply. If we embrace this opportunity, we can get out ahead of that, and we can actually dramatically improve affordable and safe housing for everyone. That's the huge opportunity that Pasadena has ahead of us. And that's what the Pasadena Affordable Housing Coalition is reaching out to you and asking for your help to achieve this goal. It's a great opportunity for Pasadena to be a city that works for everyone. And I think now it's my turn to turn it back over to Amara.
So thank you to every panelist. Thank you, Rick, Allison, Margaret, and Jill for presenting. We are now going to move into a time of Q&A. So I see that you've already been populating the Q&A with your questions. While you think of more questions and put those into the Q&A feature, we are sharing the results of the first poll. So take a look at those and see how your answer is measured up in this population. And we will move into a time of Q&A. Anthony?
Okay, yes. The first question that came up was by Michelle White, and she posed a really good question, which was, how do we plan to organize very low income workers and people of color in this housing element work? And particularly this question is addressed to Bill Wong. What about dealing with issues like rent control that are very important to our low income?
Maybe we should wait to ask Bill questions till after Bill's had a chance to.
Right. Okay. Well, then anyway, those are that's the first question. How do we engage low-income people in our city so they have input into this important process that's going to affect them?
Yeah, and I think that we've talked about the urgent need for that. It's required by state law. The question is how, and I think we on this call in the Pasadena Affordable Housing Coalition, all the groups that are affiliated with us, and we hope to recruit more, and the city share a joint responsibility to reach out to folks who speak Spanish or who are new to the community or who are working multiple jobs, who need childcare to participate. And of course, all this is more difficult with COVID. It's not like we can just knock on doors and invite people over to the church down the block. A lot of folks are technically challenged, and so Zoom calls are not going to reach everyone. So this is a big part of the challenge. It's not just coming up with a good housing element, it's making sure that people are participating in that in an equitable way. That also kind of brings to the second question, if I could just jump ahead, Anthony. On RENA numbers, on people expected to move into the city. That's actually a little bit of a misnomer. It's also a question from Michelle White. In fact, that deals a lot with the urgent need now, people who are currently on our streets, not people who are moving in, people who are living on our streets now, people who are living in garages now, people who are living 10 to an apartment now. That's how people are coping. Plus people who are commuting to low-wage jobs in our city, people that worked in our hotels and restaurants when they were open, and we hope when they reopen, the people who work in service jobs, the people that in many cases teach our children. These folks are having to commute to Rancho Cucamonga or to Lancaster Palmdale for their homes. Those are folks we'd like to live much closer. In fact, it'd be great if they could live here. So, but then she asks, will the city also analyze and make plans for addressing the needs of existing residents who are spending too much on housing or overcrowded? That is not required by the state, but it should be required by our conscience. And so at Pasadena Affordable Housing Coalition, we are going to strongly advocate that the housing element be comprehensive and holistic, and not just deal with housing construction, but also dealing with the reality of housing stress and rent burden. And I'll ask some of my other panelists who are very involved in those issues if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I'd like to say something. I really appreciate what you said, Rick, about churches and their natural centers as our community centers, where they already have relationships with a broad spectrum of folks. And so by hosting additional community engagements and inviting the folks they know that speak the language they know, there's some very multi-ethnic groups among churches. And so that's I think a way to multiply the outreach and making sure when David Reyes, who's head of planning, met at the community center that's actually one of the Black churches on North Fair Oaks, he looked around, he said, this would be a perfect place for a housing element engagement, So I think by asking churches if they want to host it and invite the neighbors and people they know, it could really be exciting in expanding the outreach.
I would like to add to, including the school district. Yeah. We know that there's been an adverse effect to school district enrollment because of housing costs. So we should be reaching out to district families, both the high-risk families whom we do know, families experiencing homelessness, and then, core members of PTA groups. I mean, the PTAs would be a wonderful vehicle for full discussion of the housing element to PUSD. And I would also urge outreach to the unions, both the teachers union and the certificated staff. Certificated staff tend to be on lower wages, but yet there's significant turnover because of that. So we should be cognizant. And Pasadena is full of nonprofits. Planned Parenthood comes to mind. And, nonprofits are notoriously they pay their folks a little bit lower because they are nonprofits. So there are a lot of employer stakeholders that actually wind up employing tenants and people trying to look to the future to stay in Pasadena that I hope would be welcome stakeholders as well.
Okay, there's another question that's come up about accessory dwelling units, and they're sometimes called ADUs, and they're a way to have sometimes below market rate housing produced with general infill. Would anybody like to address ADUs, to talk about those in context of the housing element?
Well, I'll take a stab at it. Right now, cities are required by state law to allow ADUs. Pasadena developed its own ordinance and is now processing ADUs. It's still cumbersome, and it's cumbersome not just because Pasadena is slow. That's not always the challenge. The private market for financing them, for building them, is still relatively at an early preliminary stage. So the kind of mass production. I live in a neighborhood that is generally considered single family. And yet we have, going back to the 20s, 30s, 40s, particularly in the 40s when we had a similar housing crisis because of World War II, a lot of people added, legally and sometimes illegally, very handsome and usable ADUs in their backyard. And bungalow courts are kind of a cluster of ADUs, if you will. So there's a great opportunity for Pasadena to evolve gracefully in units that will barely be noticed. Because if you walk through Bungalow Heaven, which is a gorgeous neighborhood, you have to look. You have to kind of crane your head around and see in the back the accessory dwelling unit. So that's a great opportunity for us to add hundreds of units without having very much impact on community quality of life. If anything, potentially some positive impacts of seniors being able to stay in the neighborhood that they've lived in without rattling around in a big house, more affordable, make room for some of their kids and grandkids in a big house. There's a lot of opportunities with ADUs. And we hope that Pasadena will aggressively push on that. Bill will tell us about an exciting thing. Habitat for Humanity is building an ADU on a former Caltrans home in the back with a subsidy from the city of Pasadena.
I'd like to also hitchhike on what Rick just said. Our organization, Making Housing and Community Happen, has a ADU committee. And we're looking to streamline the process so that it is not so bulky, and also try to advance these forward so that everyone has access to have an affordable ADU. And one of the things that was interesting in the last housing element, they had to do all these studies to determine how many ADUs existed in the city, and there's just a lot of research that had to be done, and it wasn't getting done, and there was no dates and deadlines. So we called the state, and during the last housing element cycle, after the city had already submitted it, signed and sealed, and we said we feel like it needs to be sent back. There really needs to be more dates and deadlines. So they sent it back, and we were able to get a date by which those studies had to be complete. And as a result, they finally did the studies, and today we can have 2 on a lot, not just inside the house, but also outside the house. And it's a great opportunity. So if you're interested in joining our ADU committee, let me know. You can tell us through chat, but it's just a huge, huge opportunity that really preserves our neighborhoods and helps homeowners get extra income and so forth and stay in place. So I think Bill wanted to say something too. Bill Wong.
Well, sorry. Okay. So I just want to remind our attendees that if you have questions that were not answered live, just keep in mind we might be answering you through the Q&A feature, and we might reserve some of those questions for the end. But just to keep us on track, yes, at this time, I would love to introduce Bill Wong, who directs the City of Pasadena's Housing Department. The Housing Department provides a wide array of affordable housing programs, as well as programs for those experiencing homelessness. The city has a highly effective inclusionary housing ordinance, which requires that 20% of the units in new developments need to be for lower income families. Bill's leadership and the Housing Department was recognized a few years ago with a national award for having a top housing policy for a mid-sized city. Please welcome Bill Wong.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen here. And I hope I'll be able to answer a number of the questions. Firstly, David Reyes, who's our planning director, couldn't be here, and the housing element is a planning document. Even though it's about housing, it's a planning document. So it is prepared out of our planning and community development department. And so he's asked me just to point out how folks can participate in and find out more about the housing element process. So if they go to the planning and community development department's website, the easiest way to find out about the housing element is go to this little drop down menu here, and there's the housing element update. And you get this page on housing element update, and then there's a button here called share your thoughts. So this will show you where there are opportunities, community, outreach, which will be Zoom meetings, I presume, will be scheduled for updates and to solicit input. So he just wanted me to point everybody to that. And then there's documents here for things to read, and there's something here that talks about the need and the RENA numbers and so on and so forth. So they have a whole page, the housing element update, for folks to interface with the planning department on. Okay, so let me just close this and bring up my PowerPoint here. So thank you for having me here. I just have a few quick slides to go over. I think I have 10 minutes. And it's really just to sort of present, what we have in place and what we plan on doing in the future. So, here's the housing element. This is the information, the link to the housing element update page. Okay, so producing affordable housing. As Allison mentioned, we have a housing crisis because increases in income have not kept pace with increases in housing costs. So this is the crux of our housing crisis. And oops, let me see, get rid of this. And so this is the crux of the problem, right? Incomes have not kept up with housing costs. So the solution, the best solution, there are many things that we can do about this, but the very best solution is to tie those two things together. And that's with what we call long-term deed-restricted housing. This is where incomes, where the housing cost, the rent, or the sales are tied to the income, the median income, or some level of median income. And those two things are always tied together, and they stay tied together for long-term, 30 years, 55 years, 99 years, in perpetuity, long-term. So that's the way to directly address the cause of the housing crisis. So rent subsidies, which the city has, and rent control, which the city does not have, they don't do this. They don't directly tie those two things together. Not that they're not useful, but they don't directly tie those two things together. So long-term, producing more long-term, deed-restricted housing, this is the kind of prime affordable housing that we like to do. So why don't we just do more of it? Why isn't there just more of it done? Well, because developing affordable housing is not economically viable in Pasadena. That means that private developers, the numbers just don't work for them to do this. The cost to build, the cost to buy the land, the cost to build is higher than what they can afford if they keep the rents or the sales prices artificially low. So what do we do? Well, there are a few ways to create deed-restricted affordable housing. These are the three primary ways right here. You can subsidize it, you can require it, or you incentivize it. And Pasadena is active in all three of these ways. But to subsidize it, right, that means the city would contribute some land, or the city would provide, or some other public agency would provide some below market rate financing. Could be tax credits, could be just low cost loans. The problem with this is there's limited numbers of amount of city-owned land. There's limited amount of subsidy dollars. So we're not going to subsidize our way out of the affordable housing crisis unless this amount goes up tremendously by magnitudes and magnitudes. Okay. So another way is to require it, and the city has been very active with the inclusionary housing ordinance. Most cities in Los Angeles County do not have inclusionary housing. but Pasadena has had it, and it has directly produced about 600 units so far, with another 500 units indirectly produced. That is, developers that have paid the fee, that money has gone to produce more units. And then we could also, affordable housing can be incentivized, and that's by things like density bonuses and property tax waivers. All right, there's talk about the homeless numbers in LA County, absolutely a crisis. So this just shows the history in Pasadena. So Pasadena are these blue bars. I don't have 2020 here, but in 2020, the number was 527 in 2020. In LA County, the number has continued to go up. We made some very significant structural changes in 2010, 2011 that really bent the curve for us. If we hadn't done that, we believe our numbers would be somewhere around, instead of 527, somewhere around 1,600. 527 people experiencing homelessness on any given night in 23 square miles is way too many. We're the first to admit it's way too many, and we're working hard to try to address that issue. But just to put it in context where we are in relation to the rest of the county. And then this little map shows where the affordable housing is in Pasadena and how many affordable housing units we have. Sorry, this table is too fuzzy to read, but the bottom line here is there are 3,775 households households that are living in affordable housing. The little yellow dots, those are tenant-based Section 8. There's about 1,000 on this map, about 1,000 of those. That's where somebody gets a Section 8 voucher and they go and rent with a private landlord somewhere. The bigger dots and the colored dots, like these colored dots over here, if you look at the map over here, those are the existing deed-restricted units that I've been talking about. These are the ones that exist, and there's about 2,700, 2,800 of those in the city. And then these numbers, there's 15 numbers here, like number 5, number 1, number 14 here. Those are projects that are currently in the pipeline. We have 15 projects currently in the pipeline, totaling almost 900 additional units. Okay, and let me just show you, here they are. This number down here, the total is 902. If you add all of those up, it's 25 short. That's because there's another small category that I didn't include in this table, just so you can read, but there's an additional 25. Those are ones that just got completed, just recently were complete, like our Decker Court project, some of you may know. But anyway, we have a number of projects scattered throughout this, spread out throughout the city. Oops, sorry. Spread throughout the city. These are the council districts. And they include projects that are new construction. So this is like a vacant site, new affordable housing is being built there. We have a total of about 400, almost 450 new construction units. There are some that are acquisition rehab projects. So these are existing buildings. They're not affordable, but they're going to become affordable housing, long-term deed-restricted affordable housing units. We have about 122 of those. And then we have existing deed-restricted units that are older, that are being refinanced and rehabbed with a substantial rehab to preserve these units and keep them in place. I think everybody would agree it doesn't make sense to let our existing affordable housing stock become uninhabitable while we try to build new ones. We need to do both. We need to build new and keep the existing stock in good, decent, safe, and sanitary housing. We have about 208 of those. And then we have inclusionary units. These are the ones built that are going to be built under our inclusionary ordinance. We have about 125 of those. So total 902 if you add another 25 units that were just built. Interesting thing, because we're talking about, there's a lot of talk about RHNA. These ones right here, which I think we will all agree are important, affordable housing, these won't count towards RENA. The preservation units and these existing buildings or units that are acquired and convert market rate units that are converted to affordable housing, even though they are long-term affordable housing, they don't count towards RENA. So there's a lot of important things that we do that don't fall within RENA. RENA is just one aspect of what we do. And then lastly, I would just like to say the way this table is organized is they're based on sort of the progress of these projects. These are all very real projects. So these projects here, these 5, these are all under construction, okay? These 5 here, the city has already taken an action or committed funding to them. These other ones are in pre-development, but it means the land has already been bought. They're already going through the entitlement process. These are real projects, okay? So all of these 900 units, these are very real. They're all long-term deed restricted units. We hope to, in the next year, we have, potentially several hundred more that can get into this onto this pipeline, and we hope to help them move them into that onto the pipeline list. But this pipeline list is only very real projects, not conceptual ideas. These are very real projects. Okay. And as I mentioned, building affordable housing, units that meet RENA, that's not the only thing that we've done. There's a lot of other very important things that we've done to support affordable housing, to support tenants, to prevent homelessness. And here are just a few quick things that we've done recently. So we've strengthened our tenant protection ordinance to protect renters. We've strengthened our inclusionary ordinance so that it can produce more units. We've done a number of things, and I put them in red, that are related to COVID. And these all had to be done very fast over really like the last 9 months. We initiated an emergency eviction moratorium. We increased funding to the Housing Rights Center to deal with landlords that might try to improperly displace or evict tenants, and also to provide some legal representation in the case of legal Project Room Key. This is where we house over 100 of our most vulnerable homeless, most vulnerable COVID vulnerable, unsheltered, mostly unsheltered homeless individuals into motels for many, many months. We spent $1 million on emergency rental assistance. This is to help low-income renters with their back debt. And then we've done a lot of hygiene things related to those living out on the streets. We have weather-activated motel vouchers that are actually in place right now because of the weather. We funded the services for a safe haven program. That is a program, a faith-based program, being initially started with All Saints and First United Methodist Church. We have initiated an ADU pilot program to help to provide financing to incentivize the creation of new ADUs. And we have a shared housing demonstration program. And then lastly, just some of the upcoming things. A lot of these are subject to city council approval. So, but these are things that we're working on. LA County is going to come out with a new rental assistance program. City of Pasadena so far is not going to get any direct money. So we will work with our renters to let them know about the county program and encourage them to participate in the county's program. We hope to come forward with a very exciting program, moderate income, to address the moderate income range for rental housing. Sometimes people call it the missing middle, middle income, missing middle housing, because there's not a lot of resources there. So we hope in the next several months to come forward with a sort of a bold plan for that. We are rejoining the San Gabriel Valley COG, and there are some exciting things that are happening region-wide, and we think region-wide is what happens region-wide is very important. Homelessness is not just a Pasadena issue. So we'd like to support other cities, and we have been actively supporting other cities. They have a Project Home Key, very exciting. 4 motels were acquired in the San Gabriel Valley, 2 in El Monte, 1 in Baldwin Park, 1 in Hacienda Heights, totaling over, it's a couple hundred new units. Most of them will be used for emergency shelter first, and then converted to permanent supportive housing later. And then the San Gabriel Valley COG is procuring a consultant to do a CAHOOTS-like study. CAHOOTS is a famous program up in Eugene, Oregon, that has a nonprofit organization that responds to mental health crises rather than sending law enforcement. And then we have some ideas for 2 other pilots for the ADU program. We have to relocate our bad weather shelter, since the place that they've had it for many decades actually is not available any longer. We are getting ready to launch a public education campaign on homelessness, and we hope to be able to expand the Safe Haven program with other faith-based institutions that have land that they want to assist the homeless on their campuses. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Bill. And we're going to now move into our second Q&A period. So we're going to address some of the questions you have here in the Q&A feature. And so Anthony, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay, well, I've been typing furiously because there have been so many questions. It's hard to know where to begin. One of the very persistent questions has been about traffic issues regarding affordable housing. Does anybody want to talk about how affordable housing affects the traffic patterns?
Well, I think that the focus really is on housing, and sometimes we think that that housing produces traffic. Again, if you have 10 families in an apartment, finding decent housing for 10 families doesn't increase the traffic. And much of the traffic, particularly here in the center of our city, is pass-through traffic and commuter traffic. People are coming to shop here, people are coming to work here, people are coming to our educational institutions, our hospitals. And affordable housing, typically, because of the nature of people's income, have fewer cars. People rely more on public transit, who are seniors or who are young families or who are low income. So traffic is a real issue for Pasadena, as it is for all of Southern California, and we have to address it as we figure out where's the best place for new housing. But it is a challenge that goes well beyond housing, and building a stronger public transit system and alternatives for micro-mobility will all help make Pasadena a more livable city.
I'd
Rick,
also chime in that I see some comments about building affordable housing in transit-oriented districts, and that is something that our inclusionary housing ordinance has really helped to do, because a lot of the housing, the newer housing that has been built and is being built, are in transit-oriented districts. So to the extent that 20% of the units have to be set aside for affordable housing, means that we get the affordable housing right in the transit-oriented districts, which is important because we know people who live in luxury housing tend not to use public transportation very much, as opposed to those who have limited economic means who live in affordable housing. They tend to have a much higher usage of public transportation. So it really makes sense to get affordable housing, as much affordable housing as possible, in transit-oriented districts.
I was just going to say
Sorry, Allison. I just wanted to let everyone know we have time for a few more, probably 2 or 3 more questions at most. And we're going to put up a poll while we're answering these questions, our last poll of the presentation. And so sorry to interrupt you, Allison. Please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, while traffic is really important, I think, some of these require additional questions. Traffic for whom? And I think the 210 corridor shows us the traffic issue with market rate housing. So I would just encourage more critical thinking of what are we lifting up when we lift up the traffic objection. And I would also remind everyone that for all of the discussion we're having about our housing element, we don't actually have any current way of assessing our current stock in the form of some sort of rental registry. And that might be an additional thing to consider as we're trying to make long-term plans with the best data possible. So thank you, Amara.
One thing I wanted to add about traffic, years ago, the city council wanted to do a traffic study on ADUs. And I was very proud of Cynthia Kurtz, who was the city manager at the time. And she said, that's just not going to create an impact. And so we actually did some of our own traffic studies as an organization on areas that had like 90 ADUs on one street, and compared it to another street where there was none. And we found there was actually no impact. It was interesting with the Westgate, which was at the time the largest development in the city of Pasadena. They were proposing 800 units, and 97 of those are affordable, which is very, very exciting because of our inclusionary. But people were very concerned about traffic. So they made them do the traffic study twice. They said, there's just going to be so much traffic in this, and it was with the same good results both times. And you can even drive down there now south of old Pasadena and realize there's just traffic's not an issue there at all. And so, so it's kind of counterintuitive. People like to live close to where they live, work, and worship. And if we can make that happen, they don't have to drive the distance, and it actually lowers traffic more often than you realize.
Anthony, as you're scanning some of the questions, I've been doing the same and trying to answer some.
Okay.
One of the other recurring themes has been, what are the incentives to, as Steve Acker, who used to be on our Pasadena City Council, asked, for promoting responsible, affordable development. And I take his point about responsible. It is possible to do bad, any kind of development, and Pasadena has always worked hard, always successfully, to improve the quality of the design, so it fits well with the neighborhood. So what are some of the incentives? There's a whole laundry list, and no single one will get it. Inclusionary zoning, obviously, is a big one. But just one simple one to give you a sense of how much work we have to do. Because there's a significant amount of development in Pasadena, it will take a couple of months to get in front of the Planning Commission or the Design Commission. Your work's all done, the staff report's done, everything's ready to go, but there's only a limited amount of time for the commissioners, who are volunteers, to hear cases. So one of the local affordable housing developers, actually a profit-making business that only builds affordable housing, which is rare. They have to wait 2 months to get to the Planning Commission and 2 months to get to the Design Commission. What if we incentivized 100% affordable to get an opportunity to go right to the Planning Commission or right to the Design Commission without having to wait? Very simple, no cost change. There's lots of ways in which we can promote and incentivize the affordable housing we need, but given it's 6,000 units, we're going to have to also find additional funding from the federal government, from the state government, and from local taxpayers.
There was another question I noticed about the fees for inclusionary, and so I'd like to respond to that briefly, because a lot of folks would like to see the fees dropped and that they be required to include 20% affordable across the board. Those fees, and you can correct me, Bill, if I'm wrong, but I think all said it's about 26 million that's been accrued from those fees, and that allows the city then, through those, not the city, but part of the city, the housing department, to take those funds and then leverage those to produce more units. And without that pot of money, it's really hard to leverage and be able to get those subsidized units. But so fees are important, and those options are important. But if we had a strong local funding source, a dedicated funding source of funding, then we wouldn't need to have that fee. And we could get more units that would be affordable in those inclusionary units. But right now it seems the fee is important, as an option. But I know cities have done some great jobs in getting a strong, dedicated source, producing millions through an extra gas tax, because it, affects the distance people have to drive, or through all different measures. But there needs to be a strong working group to get serious about how to get a really good, dedicated local source of housing dollars.
Yeah, I would just add that if you look at the history of our inclusionary ordinance, the condo developers are the ones who primarily pay the fee. So most of the condo developers will pay the fee. Most of the apartment developers will build the units. That's been mostly the case. And so the condo developers, if they were to build the units, they have to build moderate income units. But when they pay the fee, we have used the money, the housing department has used the money primarily to build very low and extremely low income units. So it enables us to build housing for those who need it the most. So it's been useful. We like both. We like them to build, we like developers to build, and we like them to pay the fee so that we can do some really difficult things, build some really difficult housing for people who really need it.
I do see a question here. Forgive me if we've addressed this a bit, but how difficult is it to convert existing non-traditional structures into housing, especially in light of the pandemic?
Well, adaptive reuse is something that's been around for a long time, where, as long as it's allowed by code, non-residential buildings could be developed into housing. I was part of the first adaptive reuse project in downtown LA before I came to the city. And that took office space, old historic office space, and converted it into loft housing. And it showed there was a tremendous desire for that, and so that's been done. So there are opportunities. Someone mentioned the Darth Vader building. I think Jill mentioned this project called the Darth Vader building in Pasadena, and that's an office building that's getting adaptively reused to housing. So it can happen here. It does happen on occasion.
And Bill, you're right. The adaptive housing ordinance in Los Angeles produced 10,000 new units of residential downtown, but they had an ordinance, and they also had a process to fast track those through the fire department, the public works department, the planning department, etc. So that's exactly the kind of thing that we could have in our housing element, is the city could commit to adopting a comprehensive ordinance that would make possible some of this vacant retail, vacant office space that will be the result of COVID, and make it relatively easy, particularly for affordable housing, to be developed in those buildings. But it won't just necessarily happen. It should be part of the things that we advocate for, including in our housing element.
Yeah, just to hitchhike on that, because of COVID, I think a lot of us have realized that we can actually work out of our homes. And there's probably a lot of folks that will continue in this format that we have today. And so we may have a lot of office space that could be converted. So we need to think seriously about that. The other thing I want to mention, there was a question someone had about vacancy tax. And I think in many ways it's a good idea. I think it's something we should seriously look at in this housing element. There probably are a lot of empty high-end housing, rental housing that folks can't afford. And so we need to do a survey. We need to know how many of those exist. Is it actually viable to think about making some tax on those landlords to make sure those units, maybe they'd be, set aside for Section 8. I don't know, but there has to be some way to put those to use. And we've got a lot of empty properties that are just sitting there. And so maybe we could look at those, and there'd be some kind of tax that could maybe result in a local funding source for affordable affordable housing. I don't know, but there would be a nexus there, I think, and it's something that John Kennedy brought up in one of his public meetings, and there seemed to be a favorable interest in looking at this. So,
Jill, I just want to because anyone who's known me has known I've been banging on about a vacancy tax. I think as you drive around the city, people would be really surprised to learn what buildings that are in good shape have vacancies, where the landlord is holding out for market rate rent and waiting several months. A unit in my building was vacant 6 months. But we've also got dilapidated properties in our city that is sitting on valuable land. In some cases, I know on my street on North Los Robles, it had been a big house that had housed 8 vulnerable seniors, was sold and is now totally abandoned. So there's a lot of ways we can reclaim, vacant places in our city to really get people to do what we need them to do. And the vacancy tax is a really powerful tool. The city of Vancouver in Canada used that. And in fact, they found that their vacancy tax rate was actually too low and increased it. But there are lots of creative tools out there for us to use in the city of Pasadena.
Mara, as we switch from answering questions here, I think it's really important to keep in mind there's just been a tremendous number of good ideas, good questions raised in the chat and questions and answers. This is exactly what our coalition is advocating for, is a robust dialogue in which all of the smart people, caring people in Pasadena can actually weigh in and develop together a good housing element. That's why we had today's webinar, and that's why we're really happy to have 100 of you weigh in. And there's lots of opportunity for us to capitalize on the good ideas that you've floated and the good questions you've asked.
That's absolutely right. So as we are winding down here, we are going to throw up one more poll. And I just thank you all for your questions and for being so engaged. As Rick said, that's going to be needed. So we're going to throw up our last poll here. And I know what you guys are all thinking after hearing this tremendous information, because I've been seeing it in your questions. And that is, how do you get involved? Well, you'll see, first of all, you'll see some poll results from all of our polls in just a moment. But what do you do next? We want you to join this coalition. So we will be contacting you via email. And we want you, when you're contacted, to get actively involved. Mark down meetings on your calendar and share that information with your circles of influence. And we want you to get ready, because this is going to take a lot of work and it's going to be worth it for our city. We need ambitious outreach to advocate and make the community's voice known in this housing element. And we're so grateful to be able to partner with the city in order to do that. So we will just need your participation. A very important step that you can make in spreading the word to make sure that we have diverse community representation is some practical things. You can host a meeting with your friends, your workplace, groups that you're involved in, organizations you're a part of, communities that you're a part of. Just as an example, many of you have been asking about this presentation. Well, this whole presentation is being recorded and will be a tool for you to use. So you could host a Zoom party and watch together with your circles of influence and talk about it and keep spreading the word. It's those small steps that will build up this coalition, and it'll be the building blocks for the success that Pasadena will see in leading as a city to create a safe and beautiful and affordable community for everyone. And that's really our goal. So we want you to get involved. So look out for the emails, tell your friends and your neighbors. And I'm looking at the poll results right now. Many of you, 85% of you so far, are saying yes to the call to get involved. That's fantastic, because the 100 of us that are on this call, it will take 100 times more, right, for us to make an impact and really get a representation of what we want to see in the city. So with that, Thank you so much for your participation. Thank you to all of the panelists today. Please stay in touch. We will be in touch with you, and let's stay active and get this housing element done, something that we can all be proud of.